Welcome to Conversate, our podcast where we engage in conversation. On this week's episode, I, Aaron Gerke, am joined by special guest Joe Battisfore, who is a member at Saints Peter and Paul and serves as our volunteer director of community outreach. We have a conversation about worship and about Joe's experience serving in the military and how he and fellow soldiers gathered together for worship on the battlefield, and also how that corresponds to his desire to have an active life of worship now, no longer being in the military. So I hope that this is an encouraging conversation for you and just provide a little bit different perspective into why we worship. We hope you enjoy it. Well, good morning, Joe. It is good to see you. So welcome to this episode of the podcast. And I have with me today my good friend, Joe Battisfore. And we're doing this thing through Zoom today as I'm out of town traveling for a meeting. But so I'm down in Wisconsin. Joe's in Calumet, I think, right? That's your office. And,
Yeah.
And so we're gonna have a little conversation today about worship, following up on my sermon from Sunday about the importance of worship. So as we're tracking with the returning exiles coming from Babylon back to Jerusalem, what we noticed in Ezra chapter 3 was that the very first thing that they reconstructed in Jerusalem was their altar, and they so that they could reinstate their sacrificial system, as that was kind of the central thing in their worship. So they had been in exile for, at this point, somewhere like 55, 60 years. So coming back, like, you can only imagine how important it was for them to want to gather together for worship. So again, I have Joe Battisfore with me today. It's just me, Aaron, and Joe, for those of you that are listening and not watching the video. And I invited Joe. He's a friend of mine, a partner in ministry. Joe actually serves as a volunteer on our kind of volunteer ministry staff, as our director of community outreach, helping our church to serve the needs of the community throughout the world. And so, Joe, we thank you for that, and thanks for joining in today. But can you just briefly introduce yourself and maybe your family, what you do for work?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Houghton here, and I spent 28 years in the United States Army, and retiring in 2016. I have a wife, Joy, a daughter, Jessica, son, Hunter, and my nephew, Elliot. I currently work as a veteran service officer, so I help connect veterans with their benefits.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe, for your service and for all that important work you're still doing for so many struggling families and veterans as well. So I specifically thought about you for the podcast this week because as I was thinking about these exiles and this, kind of being away from their normal life. So for many years, they had the centrality of worship in Jerusalem, had been the place that they went. They were taken captive in Babylon, and now they're back. So I was thinking about you and your military service, and so in some of our conversations, you've shared with me about some of your experience just in life in general, kind of going back and forth through active involvement in church and that sort of stuff. But I was specifically thinking about you in terms of like military service and being overseas. What was it like for you to be literally on the battlefield, away from like a gathered worshiping community, a church? What was that? I don't know. What was that like for you?
Well, there's certainly been times in my life when I've put emphasis on worship and less and more, but there's nothing that trials tend to to bring us to God, I think. And
Oh,
and what was it like? So I can speak. It's easy for me to talk about my most recent deployment before I retired, and it was in Afghanistan in 2009. It was a difficult and challenging mission. Our mission was to search for improvised explosive devices, and we were regularly engaged by enemy forces, and it was challenging, um, and dangerous, and we took solace in worshiping together at times.
hmm.
Um, when I look back in hindsight, I think that, we should have done that a lot more. But there were many times that we were between missions, and we would be sitting together, reading passages in the Bible, and just being thankful for the protection that we had, for the strength that we had, um, and there were times even when it was even, we were out on mission, and we might be on the side of a mountain, and a few of us would come together and pull out our Bibles and read through some passages, and it was incredibly comforting,
Wow.
and it yeah.
Did you did you have like a chaplain deployed with your unit or not?
Yeah, so there are chaplains, usually at least in a battalion size. So battalion size element would be 500 to upwards of 1,000, and probably 900,
Okay.
in several companies. So a battalion size element would usually have a chaplain that would travel around to the different line units, and we certainly saw a chaplain at times. But we were in a very remote location in Afghanistan, so we really didn't have that direct support, and it would be difficult to coordinate it, because we were on and off mission constantly, just with really no regular intervals. There were, but speaking for a lot of guys, as soon as we would travel from, a lot of times, from patrol bases to combat outposts um, to forward operating bases, which are much bigger. And when we got to the larger areas, if we a lot of guys would look up and see what services were available in those larger areas, and then attend those.
Okay.
I found when I was in Iraq, and there were the built up areas were more built up, there were more regular services and more access to that things. It wasn't so rural.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So most of the time when you guys were kind of, I mean, having those times of worship, really, right? I mean, is that what, like, would you define it? Would you use that word in your own mind, like looking back in those times where you're, you said you're seeking comfort through the scriptures and guys coming together, like in your mind, would you classify that as worshiping God, like with those fellow soldiers?
Yeah, I think yes. I think, and again, I look back and think, man, I wish we would have done more of that stuff, but it was turning our faces to God, and
Yeah.
so many things were out of our control, and just like now, just like everywhere, but it was maybe a little more poignant there, but
And intensified, I'm sure.
and intensified. But it's really, we were going through trials, and it was comforting to turn our faces to God, to acknowledge Him
Yeah.
as our God.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I defined it in the sermon that, worship is first God giving to us.
Mm.
So God gives and we receive, and then we respond in thanks and praise. And I mean, I heard you say that you received comfort,
Right.
solace, peace, maybe even.
And the faith and the desire just to meet together. I mean, all that comes from God, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a gift for our faith is a gift from God. It's not even of our own. I mean, it's a gift to, and that, yeah. So it was a wonderful gift for God to give us faith.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I mean, maybe it's not a perfect alignment between like being in the military and these Jews being in exile. But at least in terms of like being apart from like a gathered congregation, like you have now at Saints Peter and Paul, like, I don't know, is there anything from that past experience, like not having it or being away from it, that makes having it now even that much more meaningful or important to you?
Yeah. Well, you know, one thing that one part of military life is kind of a brotherhood or a tribalism, a sisterhood too. I mean, it's a really close knit community, and a lot of times, and myself included, people struggle when they leave that. A lot of guys struggle a lot with it because it is. I mean, you eat, sleep, you're together, you bleed together, you sweat together, you share your everything with each other, and that closeness is really, I think, a lot. I never really realized but I am realizing now that it's a lot like fellowship in Christ and fellowship in our churches.
Yeah.
Um, so, I think for a long time, I would have preferred to be in the back and not. And sometimes I still feel urges like that. I just kind of to hide a little bit. But in the last year, a couple of years here, I've really come to understand the importance and what it does for us to be together and to stir each other up.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think we just do so much better together like that. So yeah, I appreciate that.
That's an interesting connection, I mean, that that whole idea of that. I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, I've never served in the military. I played on sports teams, and maybe you get little elements
Yeah,
of this
yep,
where you've like,
yep.
you wake up, you wait, you lift weights together, you exercise together, you compete together. I mean, there's some of that kind of like, man, I'm part of this, right?
Right.
I would say even so much so more should it be in the church,
Yes.
right? And that's when we like, and I feel like I'm sensing that, like, having gone through this COVID deal together, we have this sort of shared experience, this difficulty, and in it, and I'm just speaking as one church, St. Peter and Paul, but in that shared experience, that difficulty, we turned our eyes to God and said, God, you are in control. That we by no means are in control. This is a big mess. Like, you are all that we have, let your will be done among us, and I feel like there is more of that understanding that we're not just, gathered together to, I don't know, just to hear an interesting word, but to actually like to do this, to live life together, as it ought to be. Yeah. Cool. And I know that. Do you want to? Would you mind sharing maybe briefly a little bit about like some of the Christian witness opportunities that have come about also, like, for you now through some of your work with Veteran Service Affairs, and how that's maybe leading others to this this gathering of God's people to worship Him?
Sure. Sure. I mean, I've spoken before about I'm blessed with an opportunity to to help people. That's my job. That's what I do that, and I usually spend quite a bit of time with people, and listen to things that they're going through, and often when I'm finished professionally helping them, a lot of times I share just the peace and the strength that I found in Jesus Christ, and and it's just an awesome opportunity. And some of that is paid off where we've started a veterans Bible study along with a chaplain, a retired Air Force chaplain in the area, Chaplain Chiswick, and we meet once a week there. So that's a great opportunity. I also volunteer to meet with a local hospice organization where we kind of do a little presentation to veterans and their families when they're in their uh, final hours, and that's been a really awesome blessing.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you for doing that as well. You know, the, I mean, I have a unique perspective on this kind of this gathering together to worship God, because, you know, you could say that's my job and I have to show up every Sunday, but I absolutely, I, I love being together with God's people, uh, receiving from Him what only He can give, and responding collectively to Him with thanks and praise. Um, there's, I mean, there's nothing like it in my opinion. It's one of my favorite things that I get to do, besides, you know, sit with people and watch, like literally watch lives being changed, like through one-on-one conversations. I mean, I love all of that, but like the corporate gather, I mean, just to mutually see the humility of people, you know, this gathered group of people. I mean, you think about it. I mean, we've got, you know, very wealthy people, very poor people, very educated people, very uneducated people, all kind of mutually at the foot of the cross of Jesus saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner, right? I'm no better than this person. I'm no worse off than this person, but God, I need you in my life, right? And God speaks to us. He delivers to us the word of forgiveness. He offers His body and blood for us, and we sing and shout praises to Him. I mean, it is the thing that God's people have been doing from the very beginning, right? I mean, again, back to the story of the exiles. This is what they desired coming out of exile. I mean, it was also the thing that got Daniel in trouble in exile. It was the thing that got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in trouble in exile. This just desire to turn to God, right? And so, yeah, I love the corporate gathered worshiping community, but I also love the fact that you shared some of this reality that, like, you and your brothers on the battlefield also had the capacity, the ability, the desire to worship God on your own, you know, without the presence of a pastor or a church building, right? And so we have opportunities to live lives of worship as well. Can you, I mean, besides in military service, like, can you think of, like, in your own life, does that resonate with you? Like living a life of worship, like on a daily basis? What does that look like for you, Joe?
For for me, it's spending time in God's Word, um, and just like we're talking about spending time together in corporate worship, it's also individual worship, um, every day, and the more that happens, the more I feel like I'm in line and see the opportunities that are put in front of me. Um, I think the more at peace I am. I mean, I still struggle with things like
Yeah.
everybody, but yeah, I mean, it's learning, I think, to turn to God, not just in, extreme trials and big things, but also in little things. And sometimes that even is a challenge. I mean, you're just like, why is this little thing happening? And but for me, it's almost, I'm recognizing that it's a constant thing. You know, I think that's what I think, and I think that helps me. So, and when my batteries are getting low, and again, I'm kind of personally, there's a lot of times when I can recharge my batteries apart from people, but I know that when we're talking about, I've come to really appreciate being stirred up with other people in Christ and what they do for me and how they play. And then I'm amazed when somebody says that I've done that for them. I mean, it just amazes me, because I don't think that I'm doing any of that, but then that's our God, you know,
Yeah.
moving, interplaying with
Oh,
us, and just helping us with each other, all so that we can keep our eyes on Him and 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 do His will.
that's awesome. Yeah. I just love that. Like a lot of times that worship is that acknowledgement of God's presence and activity in our lives and in the world. I mean, I just had an opportunity like this a couple of days ago. Like uh, there was a guy that I've been trying to uh, meet with and get to know a little bit better, who's not a Christian. We've had like this like ongoing text interchange, and then it was kind of not happening. And then the other day, I was driving in a caravan with my family because we had family in town, and my my younger daughter had to go to the bathroom, so the car behind had to stop. So I also pulled over, and when I pulled over, uh, I almost didn't pull over at this one spot, but I did. I stopped right there. There was a gas station. I just zoomed into the parking lot, and there the guy that I've been like walking out of the gas station, and I'm like, I gotta go. Like actually, like I see him in the flesh, so I ran over, and it was like, hey man, we got it. We got to get together. Like one of
Wow.
these, and it was mutual, and so it was just like I didn't I didn't line that up. Like how did like in that 30-second split second decision to like pull over at that spot in that moment, it's like, God, you are the one who does these things. Like I don't, and it's when we're asking God, God, reveal your will to me. God, let me align my life to your will. All through that regular life of worship, that's the eyesight that we then have as we live in the world, and we go, whoa, God, that was amazing. That was not just a coincidence. That was amazing. You made that happen. I give you thanks and praise. I better now actually follow through and do something about that. Like that's, and so it's really cool. Like the more that we're in conversation with God through a life of worship and the gathering together of God's people in worship, I think the more that we see His hand at work in our lives, which then drive us into a deeper desire to want to worship Him even more for His goodness. So yeah, it's super cool. Well, Joe, I don't want to belabor it too much or take too much more of your time. So I just want to say big thanks to you. Do you have any final words you want to share today?
No, just thanks for the opportunity to share, and I'm thankful for the fellowship in our church that God has given all of us. I'm thankful for our ministry team, with just thankful.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joe. And to those of you listening, if there was something insightful or challenging or encouraging, our goal in this podcast is just to demonstrate how to have this conversations of faith. So go and start a conversation of faith with somebody else. Like ask them some of the same questions about what does worship mean to you, or how have you seen God at work, in your daily life, or just share how God has been at work in your life with somebody else and why it is that you give him thanks and praise. So again, take some of that and put it into practice. And Joe, you have a blessed rest of your day. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Pastor.